Welcome to Human School. I'm your host, Dr. Patil Armenian. After 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and 2 years of fellowship, I thought I was done. I did my time, got my degrees, and now I was just gonna live life. Well, think again. Some of my greatest schooling has come after my formal education was complete, and it keeps on coming. Join me at Human School, where we can learn together. I'm an emergency physician and medical toxicologist working at a large teaching hospital in California. I'm also a mom, wife, sister, daughter, and friend. Whether you work in healthcare or not, you too lead a busy life. Together, let's work on how we can thrive in all of our real-world roles. On this podcast, we'll dig deep into what it means to constantly learn and evolve, to be human. Every other week, I'll share some of my personal stories, interview inspiring people, and offer tools to help you learn more about yourself. Being on the front lines in the ER, you learn a lot about life and death. And though my philosophies were born in a busy emergency room, they can apply to anyone trying to live a joyful life here on Earth. Please listen, share, and subscribe to this podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at Human School Podcast, and feel free to let me know what topics or guests you want to hear about. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review it. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human School. This is my first interview episode, so please excuse the slight audio issues. I'm learning a lot about podcast tech around here. I'm so excited about my first guest and a dear mentor, Dr. Neal Benowitz. Dr. Benowitz is a professor emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco, or UCSF, and he's been doing research and patient care at San Francisco General Hospital since 1973. He possesses the rare combination of working in 3 fields concurrently: cardiology, medical toxicology, and clinical pharmacology. So, what I'm trying to say is that he's basically a genius. Dr. Benowitz has done seminal work in the human pharmacology of nicotine in relationship to pathogenesis, which is how disease occurs, and examining individual differences in vulnerability to tobacco-related disease. Not only has he done massive amounts of research and clinical work, but has helped shape public health policies with this data. Some of the very concepts that are so commonplace to us now, like banning indoor smoking and having intense smoking prevention efforts across all public health spectra, has really been through his and colleagues' work that has shaped our thoughts about nicotine and its relationship to the human body. Authoring over 700 peer-reviewed publications, Dr. Benowitz has also done a significant amount of human pharmacology and toxicology research regarding cannabis products. His review of nicotine addiction in the New England Journal of Medicine in June 2010 is a must-read for anyone interested in this topic in a greater amount of detail. When I was a fellow in medical toxicology at UCSF and San Francisco General Hospital from 2009 to 2011, he was the chief of the Division of Clinical Pharmacology, which used to house our fellowship. A fixture at our weekly grand rounds, Neal taught me the importance of detail and being curious about every case. One of the best parts about talking to him in this episode is understanding what drove him to work at an extremely high level for decades and how he stayed there. He discusses starting his research studies and the importance of his team, including the synthetic chemist Peyton Jacob. We touch on the weekly lab meetings famed synthetic drug chemist Alexander Sasha Shulgin also took part in. No one works alone or in a bubble, and I love hearing about unexpected team members that come together from different backgrounds. We'll definitely talk about Dr. Shulgin in upcoming episodes. We also discuss recent challenges, such as the discourse between nicotine harm reduction versus complete elimination as public health goals. As Neal says, do work that you think matters and focus on it. I'll add one more lesson from him, while having outlets such as exercise and travel to manage stress and stay rejuvenated. So without further ado, let's talk to my friend, Dr. Neal Benowitz. I'm here with Dr. Neal Benowitz.
Hello, Patil. It's very good to be with you.
Thank you, Neal. I could call you Dr. Benowitz the whole time, but I know you so much better as Neal. So for the rest of you out there, it's Dr. Benowitz. Neal was one of my program directors when I was a fellow in medical toxicology at UCSF. And I'm so happy you're here with us because you taught me a lot and continue to over the years. And I just want to get into how you became as amazing as you are, Neal. So now first, let's get into your immense volume of work. Last I checked on PubMed, you had 787 publications to your name. Does that sound about right?
That's more or less right.
And it's in so many different aspects of really toxicology, clinical pharmacology, and cardiology. You've really done seminal work on nicotine pharmacology. What do you feel has been some of the topics that you've been the most passionate about in your research over the years?
Well, first, let me just tell you how I got involved in nicotine research. So, when I was a medical student, my mentor was a clinical pharmacologist, which very few medical students know about clinical pharmacology. But I saw what he did and did some research at the University of Rochester. Then I did my training in internal medicine and then decided to come to UC San Francisco as a clinical pharmacology fellow, but with interest in cardiology. So I did like sort of a combined fellowship in clinical pharmacology and cardiovascular medicine. When I finished my fellowship, I was actually working at a community clinic and had an opportunity to be involved in a research project at UCSF on the cardiovascular pharmacology of marijuana. So the first couple of years of my career, I was studying people who were smoking marijuana, looking at cardiovascular effects, looking at dependence and addiction issues. And then when I was finished with that, and I was interested in sort of translating to healthcare, I thought, well, marijuana is interesting, but it's not a major health issue. And this was back in the 70s. What's really an issue is cigarette smoking and cardiovascular disease. And since I got expertise in studying an inhaled drug, I said, what I really should be doing is studying cigarette smoking and nicotine. So I got a position at UCSF, and the first thing I did was to set up a laboratory, recruited Dr. Peyton Jacob, who's the world's preeminent nicotine chemist. And we set up a laboratory, developed assays for nicotine, and started doing studies on the human pharmacology of nicotine. At that time, very little systematic research was done there. So I said, what if I was a pharmaceutical company? What studies would I do? So we studied intravenous nicotine, studied its pharmacokinetics, its metabolism. We studied how nicotine was controlling smoking behavior, how people were smoking for nicotine and titrating their smoking behavior to get nicotine. And then over the years, we studied individual differences in metabolism and genetics. We studied a variety of nicotine products, from nicotine medications to smokeless tobacco to hookah, and most recently e-cigarettes. We studied many aspects of toxicology and cardiovascular pharmacology. We studied smokeless tobacco. And all of this really came out of my interest in the intersection of nicotine and cardiovascular health. I was very fortunate that cigarette smoking, because it causes so much disease and because it spans so many areas, really allowed me to get NIH support for my research, which I have had continuously for more than 45 years. And it's allowed us to do a phenomenal amount of research and publish as well. Now, when I was at UCSF in the early 80s, we actually formed with Charles Becker the Poison Control Center. And then I got involved in toxicology and then started doing consultations in toxicology. And it was in that context that I met you.
Yes. When you and Peyton started the lab initially, what was that like?
Well, it was just Peyton and me and one clinical research assistant and one postdoctoral fellow. Once the assay was going, we had the most sensitive assay for nicotine in the world, which was important because nicotine levels in the blood are very low. And then we just said, well, let's just get a pure preparation, a sterile preparation, and let's just give it to people by vein and see what happens. So we looked at the cardiovascular effects, the immune effects, we looked at effects on catecholamines, effects on cortisol, gave known doses and started looking at individual differences, at different metabolites in the urine. And eventually, this work came out. We found significant racial differences, significant sex differences in nicotine metabolism, all of which had implications for treatment and disease risk prediction. But it started with that. We now have a research group that involved 8 chemists and 4 clinical research associates. And we've had many postdoctoral fellows over the years. So it sort of grew gradually over time.
Well, it's so interesting because tobacco products have been used for centuries, thousands of years, and until this point, it hadn't really been studied in the human body to this detail before.
Correct.
How would you come up with the ideas of what study you're going to do next? Did it just naturally grow from one to the next?
Well, in my clinical pharmacology training, we really understood drug development. And what does a pharmaceutical company do when developing a new drug? They set up assays, they give small amounts of drugs, they do dose response in healthy volunteers. So we said, well, let's just take the same approach. So again, we did the intravenous nicotine studies. We started looking at nicotine levels during cigarette smoking and what happens when people smoke different kinds of cigarettes and how does nicotine control their smoking behavior. So our research was the first to show that, in fact, when people are given what was then low yield nicotine cigarettes and then switch back and forth from regular to low yield, they actually had the same levels of nicotine in the blood in their body because they titrated it for nicotine effects. And so we started looking at issues of nicotine titration. We were able to do studies such as adjusting the urine pH to change the rate of nicotine elimination and showing people smoke more to compensate for that. So we did a whole variety of studies, just looking at the fact that people are titrating nicotine.
Wow.
So those were interesting studies. Over the years, one of the most important things we did was look at the question of, could you sort of unaddict someone? This came from our studies and also tobacco industry studies showing that there were critical levels of nicotine in cigarettes that sustained cigarette smoking. And back in the 90s, there were issues, well, how do we keep kids from becoming addicted to tobacco? There's a paper that Jack Henningfield, a colleague of mine, and I published in New England Journal of Medicine in 1994, suggesting a reduction of the nicotine content of cigarettes to make cigarettes less addictive. And as you might know, in 2020, the FDA is now actually proposing this as an intervention, which could really promote the tobacco endgame. We did this based on nicotine pharmacology studies, how much nicotine it takes to keep people smoking, how much you have to reduce nicotine in a cigarette to make them less addictive. So it all spun out. And I think one of the things that's kept me interested all these years is the translation from sort of basic human pharmacology studies to policy and regulation. Because now we can see how the data can be used to really affect the lives of millions of people. That's been very satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, you've just seen the evolution of its view in policy as well as in social structures. And it is huge. And I think this work really shaped a lot of that.
Well, a lot of people have been involved. We're just one laboratory, but it's really been nice. And being able to span from basic research to policy really makes your life interesting because you're not only dealing with the basic scientists, but you're dealing with consumers, with the public, with different advocacy groups, and with different public health factions and the FDA. I work with FDA to deal with nicotine products. I work with OSHA and the Environmental Protection Agency about secondhand smoke issues. So it's really been a nice adventure in translating human pharmacology to policy.
How do you explain these complex ideas to, let's say, politicians in Washington who don't have your medical background?
Well, as a professor at UCSF, I spent a lot of time teaching students. And when you teach students, you have to start at the very bottom and then sort of gradually expand on what you're saying with more complexity. And I basically approach it the same way. I'd say you start out explaining what nicotine addiction is and how nicotine controls smoking, and then what you can do to develop nicotine-related policy. And FDA has really embraced this sort of nicotine-focused regulatory approach, which says a cigarette is a nicotine delivery device, but it's the most toxic of all because it's got thousands of toxic chemicals generated by combustion. So let's just think about a continuum of risk. Cigarettes are the most harmful, and then you have nicotine medications that are relatively non-harmful, and then you have things like smokeless tobacco, e-cigarettes, and other products that go up the continuum of risk. And so the FDA, national, international policy, is now sort of dealing with this whole question. If you can't get people to stop smoking, can you give them nicotine in a less harmful way to promote harm reduction? And of course, that's generated a huge debate about electronic cigarettes, about whether they are good or bad. And we're right in the middle of that.
I was just about to ask you about that, of what do you think about electronic cigarettes?
Well, first, I'm a strong supporter of the concept of harm reduction, which means that if someone can't quit smoking because they want nicotine or need nicotine, and nicotine has got a lot of effects that people perceive as beneficial. So if someone can't or does not want to quit smoking, can we give them nicotine in a way that's less harmful? Because smoking is by far the most harmful way to get nicotine. The thing about nicotine reward or effects is when you inhale a drug, you get a high concentration in your bloodstream and your brain. You get sort of a spike. And so that's the most rewarding and most dependence producing way to take nicotine, or any other drug like cocaine, for example. So patches and gums relieve withdrawal symptoms, but they're not really very satisfying for the things smokers want from nicotine. An e-cigarette basically delivers nicotine in the same way, in the same rapidity as does cigarette smoking, but it's got many, many fewer toxins. Now, it's not safe for sure. There are potential effects on the lungs and other concerns. But if someone is a heavy smoker and can switch to electronic cigarettes, there's no question in my mind that their risk is reduced. And in time, they could switch to a less harmful product or quit using e-cigarettes. Now, the question is, how do you do that? And e-cigarettes are not one thing. There are many, many different kinds, different safety issues. Some generate very large volumes of aerosol at high temperatures, and those are quite toxic. A lot of breakdown products from the e-cigarette solvents. Others have got higher levels of nicotine, but very low temperatures, and they can deliver a lot of nicotine with much less exposure to various toxins. So I think FDA could regulate the products to find the safest products. The other thing, of course, the big elephant in the room is kids, because kids like e-cigarettes more than cigarettes nowadays by a long shot. So just one of the successes, by the way, that I'm really happy about. Smoking among high school seniors has dropped to the lowest level in 150 years, probably. It's now down below 2%. Incredible for cigarette smoking. Now, vaping has been between 5 and 10%. So that's still a concern. And I think one of the issues is that kids consider, if you want nicotine, which people like actually in many ways, they would rather use an e-cigarette than a cigarette, which no one wants. There are concerns about nicotine affecting the adolescent brain and causing lung issues like asthma and bronchitis. So the challenge now is really to address youth access. And there are many approaches to doing that. So the challenge is, can we control access to youth by the same time making harm reduction products available to adult smokers who can't quit? And that's what I'd like to see happen.
It seemed for a while that a lot of the advertisements for different types of e-cigarettes did seem geared at a younger population, don't you think?
Oh, they were, and that was terrible. That was a terrible mistake. I had worked with some of the people at Juul in the very beginning before they became huge. And the people I talked to came from the pharmaceutical industry, and they were smart. And we talked about the potential benefits of a Juul product to help people quit smoking. They were really interested in that. But then the marketing people and the Silicon Valley pressures to sell products took hold. And they started marketing as a lifestyle thing into kids. And that was really the end of Juul, I think, in terms of their public health impact.
Yeah, definitely. I want to pause to explain something to my sister who is not in medicine. I'm about to use the word pimping. Pimping is not what you necessarily might think. It's a term that's actually been used in medical education since the 19th century to describe a teaching style where the most senior person asks questions to the most junior. For example, the attending physician, who is the supervising physician on a clinical team, will ask questions to the medical students, interns, residents, or fellows. It's a vertical hierarchy. So, for example, it can be used top down. Like if I'm a fellow, I can start asking questions to the students, interns, and residents. Although meant to be used as a Socratic teaching method, by its very definition, you are put on the spot if you're the one supposed to answer the next question. So, if you don't like being put on the spot, this could be kind of a stressful thing. When done well, it's collegial, conducive to learning, and helps the attending to figure out where the knowledge gaps are with a trainee to tailor individual instruction better. When done poorly, it is stressful, embarrassing, and can be demeaning. I've been on both sides of that coin, and in my opinion, the term pimping is not necessarily a positive term. I like to call it more like I'm just teaching by asking a lot of questions, but never should it be done in a demeaning manner. Now, just to switch gears for a second, I remember when I was a toxicology fellow that I mean, I went to school straight through. I did some research, but nothing I had been interested in yet until I became a toxicology fellow at UCSF with you and the rest of the amazing group with Kent Olson and Tom Kearney, Alan Wu in the lab, just the best group. And I was so intimidated to do grand rounds in front of all of you because you all had so many questions. And especially, I would be nervous when you were in the room, Neal. And I quickly realized that your questions were actually your genuine curiosity and your interest in the cases. In the beginning, I wasn't used to all of that. And so I thought, am I getting pimped? Is this a giant pimping session? And I realized, no, you are just genuinely curious and have great questions about every case. Do you feel like you've always had that innate curiosity about everything, or is it something that you foster?
Well, I have the curiosity, but I'm also interested in details, especially in toxicology. The details matter a lot. So sometimes we can see a patient and say, well, this patient took X drug and therefore has got this, and this is how we treat them. But as you know, it's often not that simple. There are other diseases, there could be other drugs, there can be a presentation that's not really consistent with what you think it is. So I'm really interested in the details to understand, is this presentation really what we think it is? Is it caused by what we think it is? What are the alternatives that could be explaining this? And this is something I think is a really critical part of medicine in general, because there are cookbooks for practicing medicine, but then there are ways to find, how is this patient different? And how do we need to treat this patient differently? Maybe it comes from my training in clinical pharmacology, where the thrust was every patient's different, and you need to individualize drug therapy according to your patient's diseases, to their kidney function, their liver function, their sex, their age, their body mass, all that kind of stuff. So those details are important.
No, it's so important. And I was thinking before this, what are some of the big lessons that I learned from you? And I actually wrote down details because I remember we were writing a paper together and I was ready to throw away some data like it was trash. I was like, I think this is just some extraneous stuff. And you said, actually, no, that's where you have to look at those details. None of it's trash. Look at all of it. And then we were able to glean so much more from the data. And it's the same with every case. And now I feel like I do that with my toxicology patients in the hospital, where I just like to dig into every single detail possible because every situation is different. Every patient is different. Every research study is different. It's just you need to get into the details because that's where you're going to find your gems.
That's great. I think I was a success then, teaching you.
Oh, good. So one of the details I remember was, I think it wasn't even supposed to be one of your rounds days, but you happened to be covering, and there was a 2-year-old that had accidentally gotten into something, as 2-year-olds do, and we had sent it to Alan Wu's lab for analysis. We had sent the patient's blood, and it showed one of the CB compounds. I think it was 2CB. And I had never heard of that before, no clue. And you were telling me all about it. You're like, it's a phenethylamine and giving me the details. And you said, oh, why don't you just talk to Sasha? And I was like, Sasha who? And you said, oh, Alexander Sasha Shulgin. Just email him and ask him about it. He's the one who invented it. And up to that point, I just didn't even realize there could be someone that would make a compound, let alone be able to talk, and that science is people. It's not just books. So I reached out to Sasha Shulgin and went over to the farm, and he told me all the details he knew about the compound and how long it might last and everything. And that was really huge. So tell me a little bit, Neal, just how did you even know Sasha?
Okay, well, Sasha is also another example of a person whose life was just driven by curiosity. He was a chemist. I think he started his career at Dow Chemical, and then he was kind of a left-wing person and sort of left there and got into other areas of chemistry. Sasha lived close to Peyton Jacob, who's the chemist who I've worked with for my whole career. And I met Sasha through Peyton. Then we convinced Sasha to work with our research group as a consultant. So he came in one day a week, and he didn't do any chemistry, but he basically sat there and worked with Peyton and us and helped us to get new ideas, helped us develop new assays. But Sasha and also Peyton are synthetic chemists. So Sasha could synthesize whatever drug he thought about. And so he synthesized a whole series of psychoactive compounds. And as you know, he basically tested it on himself, and I think his wife Anne as well, and then took known doses and wrote down what the experiences were, and then eventually published a book with all the different compounds he synthesized and what the pharmacologic effects were based on his own experience. He was a brilliant chemist. He was extremely popular among people interested in drugs in general, and he had a great sense of humor. But again, I think the thing that was greatest about him was he was just curious about everything and willing to try anything.
Well, I just think it's so fascinating that he was a synthetic chemist in a different field in other psychoactive compounds, but was able to just come into your line of work in your lab and contribute so much there. I love hearing about the cross pollination of fields.
Oh yeah, we certainly missed him after he died. He was everyone loved Sasha.
He was just the nicest. He was just trying to map the brain. I always feel like he's trying to map the brain, see how the whole thing works. I have his books on my bookshelf behind me right now. The phenethylamines I have known and loved, and tryptamines I have known and loved. I'm sure you had some great mentor when you were in your education and even afterwards. Who were some of your favorite mentors and what did they teach you?
I don't remember which mentors, but the most important one, which I've struggled with my entire career, is focus on trying to do one thing at a time. Now that, it seems like it makes no sense because I'm involved in research that goes from basic science to public policy. I practice cardiology and toxicology. But to me, getting a project, getting into it in depth, and following through is really the key to success, at least in research. There's so many distractions in academia. There are committees, there are different sorts of research activities you can become involved with. But for us, we started working on nicotine. We learned more and more with every new discovery. We had more questions. And like I say, we're able to translate those new questions to 45 years of sustained NIH funding. And it's still ongoing now. We're still pursuing new questions all the time. So that focus, I think, is one thing. A second thing is do work that you think matters. And again, what got me interested in nicotine was the fact that it was the major preventable cause of cardiovascular disease in the US. May not be that anymore, but certainly it still is one of the 10 most common causes of premature death in the US. It still causes 400,000 premature deaths every year. So when you're doing something like that, which affects your patients, I mean, I didn't do research with my patients per se, but in a cardiology clinic at a county hospital where I work, a large percentage were cigarette smokers, and that was causing serious cardiovascular harm. So being able to persist and say, I want to focus on nicotine and tobacco, and my goal is really to eliminate tobacco for the benefit of my patients and public health. So that kind of focus drove my career and was the best advice ever. And I would do that to any of my mentees as well. Try to find something you think is really important and then get into it and stay in it and learn as much about it as you can.
I think when you have that focus, then it helps you to see the extraneous as what it is, extraneous. So you can be like, well, that committee might not line up with exactly what I'm working on right now. So I feel okay saying no to that committee, or, all the things that come our way as academic physicians.
Yes, absolutely.
What's a recent lesson you feel like you've learned? Anything pop up in the lab recently, or?
Not in the laboratory. I think the biggest, not just a lesson, but the biggest challenge is how to work with a lot of conflicting and dearly held conflicting opinions in public health. So again, this all came up with electronic cigarettes and with nicotine. So there is a large contingency of public health in the US that think these cigarettes should not be available, that they're harmful. They basically think tobacco control should be the same thing as nicotine elimination. Now, the other side, which I'm part of and which other countries like the UK really embrace strongly, is that nicotine does have some harm, but intrinsically it's no more harmful, probably less harmful than cannabis or alcohol. And it really is how you use the drug within tobacco that is the problem. And therefore, our policy should not be to get rid of nicotine per se, but should be to get rid of combusted tobacco, especially, or all forms of combusted tobacco. So it includes cigars and hookah and anything you burn. And that has really generated pretty big schisms in public health involving tobacco control. So the things I'm trying to learn now is how to navigate that, how to work with people who I respect and I have worked with for years and they're friends, but have totally diverging points of view on nicotine harm reduction. Well, one of the talks I've been giving now recently is what should the country's position be about nicotine? Should it be banned or should it be accepted the way cannabis and alcohol are? None are supposed to be used by youth. There are many lines of evidence suggesting nicotine per se is less harmful than alcohol and probably less harmful than THC. And many people like nicotine. Many people get benefits in terms of psychiatric disease and other illnesses. So it's just sort of navigating positions with your friends who just disagree with you. And I'm working on it. It's hard. It's hard.
Well, I think no, I have friends that have similar conflicting beliefs with me as well, because I just think about all of drug policy as a whole, and is it all about abstinence or harm reduction? And they're very different concepts.
Yep.
Well, I think that's one we're going to be working on for a long time. Now, what do you do to help you process things? Because as we all know, when you're analyzing data or thinking about research, thinking about what talk you're going to give, how are you going to talk to the FDA, that's not happening just in your office sitting at a desk. So what other things do you do to help you process your thoughts?
Well, like all of us in academics, we really have busy lives and sometimes stressful lives. And so I have pursued a lot of athletic pursuits, which is sort of my way to deal with stress. So I have some sort of athletic workout almost every day. I do a lot of cycling, I do swimming, I do hiking. I'm fortunate enough to live near some nice hiking trails. I've done triathlons over the years. But the nice thing about a good workout, and I mostly do it in the evening, is that when you really had a hard workout, you can't be bothered obsessing about the stressful things during the day. You just want a good meal. You want to relax. Your body gets sort of limp after exercising. So I just use exercise of all sorts as my stress management approach. That is, I also have to say that in my field, one thing that's always been nice is I've had colleagues around the world. I've met friends from many places in the world, and so also I've gotten to visit and travel to many countries around the world to visit colleagues and to give lectures and whatnot. And that's also rejuvenating.
Yeah, I do feel like travel has been one of the best perks of this job.
Yeah, especially in the smoking field. Every country in the world is dealing with the same issues, and so I've had an opportunity to visit in many, many countries to deal with, to talk to colleagues and work with their smoking and tobacco control.
You take your bike with you when you're traveling?
Unfortunately, not. I'd like to, but not yet.
Maybe later. Maybe your next trip. My last question, I guess, is have you ever actually dealt with what you would call a burnout phase in your career?
Well, sometimes I felt burnout just from the volume of work, but I've been really fortunate because combining research with patient care. So patient care for most of my career was about 40% of my time. So I did some inpatient attending, I did a clinic every week, I did consultations in toxicology. But then the other 60% was research. And so that was laboratory research or human research, writing papers, publishing papers, working on lectures, traveling to talk about things, developing policy things. And so they were really complementary. So I never was seeing patients so frequently that I was getting tired of it. Like I look forward to seeing my patients every week because that was getting me in a totally different mindset, different way of interacting with people. And it was reinforcing the importance of my research. And then with research, there are many different aspects of it, different people, different kinds of studies that I was doing. And I said different activities involving publications and presentations. So by doing those two different things, I was never really burned out. It always kept me excited. In fact, now I'm actually technically retired. I still work on research grants that are active at UCSF. I still see patients on a volunteer basis, and I'm still not burnt out. So it's worked out well.
I love that. You couldn't even retire, Neal.
That's right. I have found more time to ride my bike, but that's about the only difference.
Well, that's good. The bike missed you. No, I think that's one of the beauties of academic medicine is that we can do so many different things. And really, it's like you can do whatever interests you and not get bored. I think if I only did one aspect of it, definitely would start getting bored and more burned out. But that's the thing. It's like always do the things that your curiosity is driving you to, which are really a lot of different things.
Yep. As long as you maintain some general focus, that's all.
Yeah, general focus. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Neal. This was really great.
Well, thanks. It was really great chatting with you and great seeing you again.
Please like, subscribe, share, and download the podcast. And again, you can find us at Human School Podcast on Instagram. I'd like to thank Dr. Zac Efron for the theme music of our podcast. And I'd just like to make a general disclaimer that any of the institutions I work for, including Community Regional Medical Center, UCSF, UCSF Fresno, and American Ambulance, have nothing to do with any of my thoughts or opinions, and so we'll kindly leave them out of this. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.